Welcome back to another video with Annie's Hope. I'm Liz. I'm a staff member at Annie's Hope.
And I'm Morgan. I'm an intern with Annie's Hope.
Hi, I'm Laura. I am a staff member at Annie's Hope.
Hi, I'm Caitlin. I'm a staff member at Annie's Hope.
Today we're going to be talking about the 5 dimensions of grief. We feel grief in a lot of different ways. Some of those are feelings ways. That might be how a lot of us are used to thinking about grief. But grief can impact us across lots of different areas of our lives. So grief can happen after a death as well as before a death, when we're anticipating that someone in our lives is likely to die from a serious illness or medical condition that they have. And these 5 dimensions show up in that anticipatory grief as well. So let's start with feelings, the emotional ways that grief can impact us. Feelings can take any form. There's no right or wrong feelings for grief. Sometimes we feel lots of feelings at the same time. Sometimes we feel just one feeling at the same time. Sometimes they're big, sometimes they're small. We also feel our grief in physical ways sometimes. Grief can take place in our bodies. We might feel something like an upset tummy or a flutter in our chest, or that we're kind of bouncy with energy. Lots of different ways it can show up in our bodies. Grief can also show up in cognitive ways. Cognitive has to do with in our minds, the way that we think, the way that our brains help us go through our days. Maybe we notice that we have some differences in memory. We're forgetful. Maybe we're in the middle of a thought and we suddenly lose it. Maybe we have thoughts that just keep coming up and we can't seem to get rid of them. Maybe we ask a lot of questions, or we think a lot about the death of our significant person. Those are all some different cognitive or brain ways that our grief can show up. It can also show up in our social lives. How do we relate to people around us? What's it like with our family or our friends? Maybe even our neighbors. Does it feel the same to be spending time with people in your life? Maybe different? Is it harder to be around other people? Do we really want to be around people a lot? Do we want to be alone? Do we notice that we might be a little bit restless with other people when we're talking? Or do we just sit there and want to hear their voice because it's comforting? These are all different ways we might see our grief socially. Grief can also show up spiritually. Spiritual can mean a lot of different things. Religion can definitely be part of it, but it goes way beyond that. Spiritual can also include those bigger questions in our lives. Why is this happening? Who am I and where do I fit in? What's the point of all of this? Those kinds of things. There's no one way to define spirituality. It's whatever it means to you. And every individual and every family has their own beliefs. So for today's activity, we'd like to invite you to explore with us the way that these 5 dimensions might show up in our lives. To do that, you're going to need paper and markers, or some kind of colored writing tool. The first thing you want to do is to create a tracing of a body outline. It does not have to be fancy. Here's mine. It can look like a gingerbread person. It could look any shape that you want. The next thing that we're going to do is pick colors to show different dimensions of your grief. And they can be kind of broad things like those categories I mentioned before. And those categories are physical, emotional, cognitive, social, and spiritual. You can also pick some things that are examples in your life of how those show up within each of those categories. And then you can use words or drawings, colors, shapes, whatever speaks to you to show how that is in your body. Where do those things show up for you? We'll be doing this along with you, and we'll share a little bit about ours too. What are some ways that you all experience the 5 dimensions of grief?
One way that I feel it is physically in my stomach. I get a lot of stomach drops and stomach aches whenever someone special has died.
Mm-hmm. I feel a lot of my grief in the cognitive dimension. And I would, on my body tracing, I might put that like around in my head. My brain just feels really foggy, and it's hard for me to concentrate on maybe work that I want to do, or whether that's schoolwork or even like artistic things that I want to do. It's hard for me to concentrate.
I feel the spiritual dimension in my heart, thinking, those questions of why and what's the purpose or meaning behind this. And I think that sometimes those thoughts can be in my mind, but a lot of times it's searching my heart for what I believe and what I feel to be true.
Yeah, and I would say for social ways that I experience my grief, I had a family member die who it was really special for me, and I've really noticed changes in my family. So for me, I might show that in my hands on my body tracing, because I kind of picture it as holding hands with my family members and how that's changed. And then for emotional, I would have mood swings too, because sometimes my feelings just get big and sneak up on me. I don't know that they're coming, and they can change really, really quickly. And I might show that as some lines kind of moving all over my body, because who knows what's going to hit me next. So we invite you now to take a moment to create your own body tracing. And then use your colors, your shapes, your words, whatever feels right, to show how the 5 dimensions of grief show up for you in your body. And we'll share a slide as well with some examples of these different dimensions to help get you started. Remember, there's no right or wrong way to do this. However it comes out on the page is perfectly okay. Thanks for giving this activity a try with us. We'd like to share with you a little bit about what we created. And then we invite you to share with your family, if you like, about what you've created.
Okay, so I'll go first. Starting at the top, in my head I drew a bunch of swirls because I feel kind of foggy in a sense when someone special has died cognitively in my head. In my stomach, I drew a bunch of swirls just because I get a little funny feeling in my stomach. I get a little sick, and I don't, there's no one way to pinpoint it, but it's just all in my stomach. Physically, in my legs, I feel like I have a bunch of pent-up energy, which I depicted as lightning bolts in my legs, because I feel like I just have a bunch of energy that I need to get out in some way or another.
I'll go next. So this is my body tracing. And a couple of the dimensions that were standing out for me was the cognitive one, which I mentioned earlier. So I depicted it kind of more in my head, because I sometimes in my grief I have a hard time concentrating, and I feel really distracted. So I drew these little tornadoes. And then for the emotional dimension, I showed that I think sometimes I feel my sadness kind of in my tummy and then also through my tears, which I think can be an emotional part of the emotions through tears. And then through the social dimension, I showed that in the arms. Sometimes in the social dimension, sometimes what I need is to be around people and give hugs to people that are close to me. So yeah, those are kind of the ones that stood out for me the most.
So this is my body tracing. And so I showed the social dimension in the eyes and in the heart and in my mouth. Because I feel like a lot of the ways that I grieve socially have to do with connection, whether that's feeling more of a connection or a loss of a connection. And I feel like those things are felt through those places on my body. And then for the spiritual dimension, I place these kind of rays and question marks in the heart and in the head, above the head, because some of these ideas and questions and thoughts that I have of the whys or finding that meaning in life and death are sometimes felt in my heart, but then also sometimes it's beyond me in my control or my understanding. And then for my hands, I put physical and emotional because the ways that I grieve physically can sometimes come out in my hands with like clenching my fists or maybe pounding a pillow. But then also I use my hands to create art, and I feel like that crosses that emotional and physical. So a lot of times when I'm feeling really emotional, art is kind of my outlet for that. And then cognitive I put as clouds in my head because I think that kind of covers a lot of the thoughts that I have, but also that confusion or that distraction that I might feel. And then you'll also see kind of the physical as like a weight on the shoulders. I often feel that grief is sometimes a weight on our shoulders. And the emotional sinking from sometimes feeling it in the face, but then sinking from the throat into the belly.
So for mine, I put in the orange these kind of squiggles and question marks. For me, that's my mood swings because I don't know when or where they're going to hit in my body. And they often take me by surprise and I don't really know what's going on. For social, I put that in my hands because to me, that's kind of how I picture my connection with the important people in my life, with my family, with my friends. And it's sort of a combo for me of reaching out to them, which is these little lines, and also sometimes not being sure what I need from my friends and being surprised that something was either really comforting or was really not helpful. Another physical thing that I put is this kind of purple spiral in my belly because I really have a lot of appetite changes. Sometimes when I'm grieving, I'm really hungry, or maybe I just want to eat because I'm feeling really sad. Other times I find that I don't have an appetite at all. Maybe I didn't eat all day and I still am not in the mood for dinner. For spiritual, I put this little thread of hearts because I noticed that I still feel really connected to the people in my life who have died. And that can look a lot of different ways, but somehow it's always there for me. So I put kind of a string going from my heart out to my loved ones who have died. For feelings, I put just some tears here. There's lots of different feelings that show up, but that's kind of the first one that comes to mind for me. And for cognitive stuff, I put these gray clouds in my head. And clouds could represent a lot of things, but one of the big ones for me is worry. I'm always kind of a worrier, but boy, does it show up for me a lot in my grief. Thank you all so much for sharing about your body tracings, and 5 dimensions. One thing I noticed is that all of ours are really different. There's some things that we have in common, but there's a lot of things that are unique to each of us. And the way that each of us showed those things is also different from each other. As you're talking with your families about your drawings, we invite you to think about what's the same, what's different, how did you show things, why did you use the colors you used or the shapes? Are some of the dimensions bigger for you? Do you notice them more or less? We'll post a few more discussion questions for you on the next slide. Feel free to share as much or as little as you feel comfortable sharing. This is yours, and you get to choose what you share. Thank you for joining us today for this activity. We know sometimes in our grief journeys, things can get stirred up, whether that's through an activity or just something that comes up in our day. That's okay. If you notice that this activity or something else in your day has stirred up things that are challenging for you, we suggest that you try out some coping skills. We'll provide a list on the next slide that shows some ideas for coping skills that relate to these 5 dimensions. They may be new things, and it's okay to try out a new coping skill. Maybe you'll love it, maybe you won't, but it doesn't hurt to try out something new. We would love to see your art if you'd like to share it with us. Please feel free to email it to us at kidsgriefmatters@annieshope.org. Also, please know that we're here for grief support, and you can reach us by phone or by email. Those are shown on the screen. Thank you so much for joining us this week. We look forward to doing another activity with you soon. Bye.